The autonomic nervous system and visceral sensory neurons, part 2. So, we're moving on to the sympathetic division. The sympathetic division is also known as the thoracolumbar division. This is because all of the motor nerves for the sympathetic division come out of the thoracic and lumbar regions of the spinal cord. Thoracolumbar. Again, we have the descending tracts of the spinal cord carrying commands from the brain that will then synapse with a preganglionic neuron in the lateral horn of the gray matter, so the lateral gray horn. And then that preganglionic neuron is going to send out the signal. The preganglionic neuron is then going to enter a structure called the sympathetic trunk ganglion. So it turns out that on either side of the verbal column, we have this nerve tissue structure called the sympathetic trunk ganglion. It is specific for the sympathetic division only. It's the only one that uses it. And what happens is the preganglionic motor neurons leave the verbal cavity and then enter the sympathetic trunk ganglion. So all of them enter the sympathetic trunk ganglion. Again, that structure, as you can see, lies basically on either side of the verbal column. Now, some of the preganglionic neurons are going to enter the sympathetic trunk ganglion, synapse at that level right there with a postganglionic neuron that will then go out to its target structures. So the first thing that can happen is the preganglionic neuron synapses in the trunk ganglion at the same level, doesn't go up or down, at the same level, and it synapses with a postganglionic neuron that then leaves and heads out to its target. And those targets are going to be in the skin and blood vessels primarily. So the first possibility, first pathway, preganglionic neuron enters the sympathetic trunk ganglion, synapses with the postganglionic motor neuron, then goes to its targets, which will probably be skin, structures, and blood vessels. The second possibility is the preganglionic motor neuron goes into the sympathetic trunk ganglion and then travels up or down the structure. So it'll go up or down the structure to a different level, and then it'll synapse with a postganglionic motor neuron that will then go out and travel to its target effectors, which again are probably going to be skin and blood vessels. So the second route that is possible is the preganglionic motor neuron of the sympathetic division enters the sympathetic trunk ganglion, travels up or down to a new level, synapses with a postganglionic motor neuron, and then goes to the targets. The third possibility, The third possibility is that the preganglionic motor neuron enters the sympathetic trunk ganglion and then leaves it. No synapsing in the ganglion. It enters the sympathetic trunk ganglion and then passes through. And then it goes out to a secondary ganglion of one kind or another, collectively known as the collateral ganglia. So there are a lot of collateral ganglia where preganglionic motor neurons of the sympathetic division travel through the sympathetic trunk ganglion, keep going, and then enter the collateral ganglion and synapses with a postganglionic neuron. That postganglionic neuron, of course, that postganglionic motor neuron will then travel to the effector in the abdominal cavity or in the pelvic cavity and then control those organs and other structures. Three possibilities. The sympathetic division, as we know, when it goes and innervates all its various structures, will cause the fight or flight response. Now, normally, when we're just living our lives as regular people doing the regular stuff we do, the effects of the sympathetic division are localized to particular target structures that need to be affected. So, for instance, if the light levels change in the eye, then it would say it gets darker, then we would get a response, a sympathetic response to the irises, causing the pupils to dilate. Normali, just affecting the relevant structure. However, when we become really scared or angry, our adrenal medulla is going to release a hormone called norepinephrine. Norepinephrine, more commonly known as adrenaline. And norepinephrine will then go out into the bloodstream, travel all throughout the body, and it turns out stimulate the fight or flight response in all of the structures controlled by the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. So the hormone norepinephrine causes the overwhelming response in our body that we refer to as the fight or flight response. And so here it is, which is not a fight or flight response. See, we got breathing faster, slower heart rate, suppressing the gastrointestinal tract, increased blood flow to skeletal muscles. The correct answer is slowing heart rate. You do not slow your heart rate when you are scared or angry. You do breathe faster. You do have the bronchs and the tubes in the lungs dilating. You do suppress the gastrointestinal tract. If you're running away or fighting, it's not a good time for a snack. And you do increase blood flow to skeletal muscles so that they have plenty of oxygen and glucose to function with. All right, visceral reflexes. Visceral reflexes. These are reflexes for things other than skeletal muscles. So examples of visceral reflexes: sneeze, cough, swallowing, vomiting. There's probably special visceral reflexes within organs that can't really describe because we don't really think of that. So again, they are visceral reflexes for things other than skeletal muscles for the most part. So they require a sensory neuron, a visceral sensory neuron, and two autonomic motor neurons, again, preganglionic and postganglionic, and an effector. But it can be more complicated than that. So for instance, say you have some water going down the back of your throat. That is the stimulus, fluid entering the back of your throat. You have sensory receptors that will detect this movement of something into the back of your throat, and then send a signal to your visceral sensory neurons, and they will send a signal to the, well, in this case it's the brain, but it could be the spinal cord. And then that sensory neuron will synapse with the autonomic motor neuron, the preganglionic motor neuron. And if this is the sympathetic division, it'll go into the sympathetic trunk ganglion and then synapse with the postganglionic motor neuron, and that'll go to the effector, which would be the muscles important for swallowing. So you get that response, you get the swallowing response. So again, visceral reflexes. There's a stimulus detected by a sensory receptor, which may be the visceral sensory neuron, could be the same thing. They send the signal to the brain or spinal cord. They synapse with a preganglionic motor neuron that is then going to send out its signal to a ganglion where it'll synapse with the postganglionic motor neuron that will then go to the effectors to get the response. Again, things that happen that you can't really control once they get going: sneezing, coughing, swallowing, vomiting, and probably some other things that we're not really aware of that occur deep inside our organs. Raynaud's disease. Raynaud's disease is an autonomic related disease. Basically what happens is a person's extremities, especially fingers and toes, will sometimes have blood flow shut down, either slow down or shut down completely to these extremities. It could be exposure to cold, could be an emotional stress. Some people who have this disorder, all they have to do is reach into the refrigerator to grab something, and it will trigger shutting down blood flow to, say, their hand and its fingers. And as you can see, it can lead to shutting off blood flow, causing a lighter color to the skin. It could lead to a bluish color in the ends of the fingers. And it's thought this is due to excessive sympathetic stimulation. So the sympathetic division is overstimulating the smooth muscle tissue in blood vessels that then dilate too much, reducing blood flow too much to those structures. And some extreme cases where this happens a lot to someone, they actually can have death of tissues, say at their tips of their fingers or tips of their toes. And that is it for this part of the lecture.